My name is Marisol Navarro. I am 34 years old and I used to believe that love offered openly and without conditions was always enough. I was wrong. I married Dennis Callahan 18 months ago in a small ceremony at the Botanical Garden 2 miles from the house where I grew up. My mother cried. My Aunt Graciela pressed both my hands between hers before I walked to the aisle and said, in Spanish, "Be patient with people who don't know yet what you are." I laughed at that. I thought she meant something gentle. Dennis was 51. I had met him through a mutual colleague at the architectural firm where I worked as a senior project coordinator, the person who holds the budget, the timeline, the subcontractor relationships, and the client's trust all at the same time, while the architects take the credit at the ribbon cutting. I had been doing that job for 9 years. I knew how to read a room, how to absorb a slight without flinching, how to stay composed when a contractor came in $40,000 over estimate and needed to be walked back without knowing he was being walked back. I was good at the invisible work. I had always been good at the invisible work. Dennis owned a mid-size commercial landscaping company, Callahan Grounds, established by his father in 1987, currently operating across 4 counties with 32 full-time employees and a fleet of trucks I could see from the kitchen window every morning, parked in the side lot of the property we shared. He was warm when we dated. Generous. He listened when I talked, or I believed he did. He told me twice in our first year together that I was the most capable person he had ever been close to. I kept that. I shouldn't have kept it the way I did, like a deed, like proof of something, but I did. If you are watching this right now and you have ever walked into a family that was already formed, already sealed at the edges, already fluent in a language you were not taught, you know what I mean when I say that the distance was not the hard part. The hard part was that I kept trying to cross it and she kept moving it. What Dennis had not fully prepared me for, and what I had not fully prepared myself for, was Kristen. Kristen Callahan was 26. She had lived in the house with Dennis for the past 3 years following the end of her own apartment lease, which had ended, as I understood it, because her roommate had moved out and Kristen had not wanted to absorb the full rent alone. Dennis did not describe it this way. Dennis described it as Kristen going through a transition. In the 18 months I had known her, the transition had not visibly progressed. She worked part-time at a boutique in town, came and went on a schedule that belonged entirely to her, and occupied the large bedroom at the end of the hall that had a private bath and a view of the back garden that I, frankly, would have chosen for myself if the choice had been offered. She was not cruel to me immediately. In the beginning she was something more difficult to name. Careful, polite in a way that was slightly too precise, as if she had measured the exact minimum distance required between friendliness and warmth and placed herself exactly there. I told myself it was adjustment. I told myself she needed time. Dennis's house had been his father's house before it was his. A 4-bedroom colonial on just under an acre, with a wraparound porch that needed 2 boards replaced and a dining room that seated 10. His mother had died when Dennis was in his 40s. His father had died 3 years before I met him. The house had passed to Dennis cleanly, and the business with it, and Kristen had grown up understanding both as hers by proximity if not by legal fact. I did not fully understand this when I moved in. I understood it later. The first time Kristen said something I could not explain away, we were 7 weeks into the marriage. My family had driven up for the weekend. My mother, my Aunt Graciela, and my younger cousin Pilar, who was 22 and had just started her first real job and wanted everyone to know it. We were going to have dinner at the house. I had spent the better part of Saturday cooking. A pot of caldo de residential that had been going since morning, rice, beans from scratch, sliced avocado, the particular salsa my mother made with roasted tomatillos that I had learned by standing next to her in her kitchen for 15 years before I could replicate it correctly. Dennis had been at a job site until 4. He came home, showered, sat at the kitchen table with a beer, and said the food smelled incredible. I believed him. The house smelled the way my grandmother's house used to smell on Sunday afternoons, and I felt for a moment that I had done something right. Kristen came downstairs at 6:15, 20 minutes after my family arrived. She had not mentioned she would be joining us. She had not mentioned she would not. She stood in the kitchen doorway in a way that suggested she had assessed the room before entering it, then walked to the refrigerator, took out a bottle of sparkling water, and said to no one in particular, "I didn't know we were doing a whole thing tonight." My Aunt Graciela, who had been arranging plates and who had the specific honed patience of a woman who raised 4 children and buried a husband and kept going, did not look up from the plates. My mother smiled in Kristen's direction the way she smiled at difficult situations. Open, steady, without concession. I said we were having dinner, that I'd mentioned it to Dennis on Thursday, that there was plenty. Kristen said, "Oh, I know. I just didn't realize it was going to be this." She looked at the pot on the stove. She didn't complete the sentence. My cousin Pilar looked at me. I looked at the cutting board. I folded the dish towel I was holding into a smaller square and set it on the counter before I answered. I told her there was a seat at the table whenever she wanted it. She sat. Dennis came in from the garage and greeted everyone warmly. He was genuinely warm with my mother, who responded to him the way she responded to people who made an effort, and we ate. The food was good. The conversation moved. My aunt told the story about the time a rooster got into my grandmother's kitchen, which is a story my family has told at every table for 30 years, and it made my cousin laugh until she had to put her fork down. Kristen ate without speaking. When she finished, she carried her plate to the sink, rinsed it, set it in the drying rack, and said to Dennis that she was going upstairs. She did not say anything to my mother. She did not say anything to my aunt. She did not say thank you for the meal, or that it was nice to meet them, or any of the things that a person says when they have sat at a table where someone cooked for hours and your family's guests have traveled to be there. Dennis watched her go. Then he looked at me and said, "She's tired, she had a long week." I said, "Okay." My mother watched me say it. My aunt watched me say it. Pilar looked at her phone. That was the beginning. I recorded it the way you record things you don't yet have a name for. Not in writing, not in any formal way, but in the specific register that lives just below conscious thought, where the body stores things the mind is not ready to classify. My throat tightened as we cleared the table, and I kept my back to Dennis until it passed. What followed over the next 14 months was not dramatic. That is the thing about this kind of erosion, it does not announce itself. It comes in small, regular increments, each one individually explainable, each one leaving just enough doubt that you find yourself constructing the explanation before anyone even asks you to. I had spent 9 years doing invisible work. I knew how to absorb pressure without showing it. That skill, which had made me excellent at my job, made me precisely the wrong person for this particular situation, because I absorbed things I should not have absorbed, and I absorbed them cleanly, and so they kept coming. I built the household schedule for the first time in February, 6 weeks after we married. Dennis traveled 2 days a week for site visits. I worked full days Monday through Friday. The house was not small and it did not run itself. I made a shared calendar. I arranged the grocery delivery schedule. I coordinated with the cleaning service that came on alternate Thursdays, managing the schedule when they needed to shift days, communicating back and forth with the owner of the service so that Dennis never had to. When the furnace required a service call in March, I was the one who stayed home from the office, managed the technician, paid the invoice, and filed the warranty paperwork. The repair cost $1,100. I paid it from my own account because Dennis was at a job site and I did not want to wait. When I mentioned it to him that evening, he nodded and said he would transfer it back. He did, 3 weeks later, after I mentioned it a second time. I noted the date and the amount in a running document I had started keeping. Not because I was planning anything, but because I track things. It is the nature of my work. Numbers without a record are not numbers. They are impressions, and impressions fade. That document lived on my personal laptop. I added to it whenever something crossed the property line that I had managed alone. By March's end, I had 4 entries. I managed the household the way I managed a construction project. Not by controlling it, but by watching every moving part and making sure none of them failed. I tracked the expiration date on the homeowner's insurance renewal and flagged it to Dennis 3 weeks early. I caught a billing error on the utilities account that had been overcharging the property for 7 months and recovered $412 in credits. I scheduled the exterior painting that Dennis had been intending to address for 2 years and managed the contractor through 3 weeks of prep and execution, including 1 weather delay that required a full reschedule. I paid the deposit from my own account and was reimbursed 6 weeks later. None of this was asked of me. None of it was acknowledged. I did not do it for acknowledgement. I did it because I was in the house needed it, and I was the person present and capable. Kristen, in this same period, did not take the trash out on collection day without being reminded. I am not saying this to be unkind. I am saying it because it is precisely true and precision matters. In April, Dennis's business partner, a man named Roy who had been with Callahan Grounds since the early years, retired. The administrative and scheduling work that Roy had been absorbing, vendor communications, crew scheduling, equipment maintenance logs, needed to go somewhere. Dennis did not hire for the role immediately. He absorbed it himself, which meant he was distracted, overextended, and at the house less. I began helping without being asked. I knew scheduling. I knew vendor communication. I sat with Dennis 3 evenings a week after dinner and helped him organize the backlog. I built a tracking spreadsheet for the equipment maintenance cycle that the business had never had, which prevented 2 service failures that season and saved, by Dennis's own estimate, somewhere near $8,000 in emergency repair costs. He thanked me once, on a Wednesday night in June, by saying, "I don't know what I'd do without you keeping me straight." He said it the way you say something you mean in the moment and don't think to repeat. Kristen was in the room. She was looking at her phone. She did not look up. The month between Roy's retirement and the end of summer was the densest stretch. I was working full days at the firm and coming home to a second job that had no title and no paycheck. There were evenings I sat at the dining room table, the same dining room table with 2 laptops open, one for my firm's project files, one for Callahan Grounds' scheduling backlog. Dennis would be on the phone with a crew supervisor. Kristen would be upstairs. The house would be quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of Dennis's voice in the next room, talking about a client whose sod had come in wrong and needed relaying before the weekend. I would finish the subcontractor log for his business and then open my own work and keep going. I did not say anything about the hours. I did not count them, not then. In July, a pipe joint in the upstairs hall bathroom failed on a Tuesday morning while Dennis was in the field. Water came through the ceiling of the hallway below. I was working from home that day. I found the main shut-off, stopped the water, called a plumber, managed the repair, arranged for a water damage restoration company to assess the ceiling, and had an insurance claim filed by 3 in the afternoon. Total out-of-pocket exposure, 0. Timeline from failure to repair authorization, 6 hours. Kristen was home. She had heard the water. She had not come out of her room. I do not say this to indict her. I say it because it is part of the picture, and the picture matters. By August I had been doing this for 8 months. I had managed the household, contributed to the business, absorbed every logistical failure that crossed the property line, and done it without complaint and without accounting. I had cooked dinner 4 nights a week on average. I had maintained the relationship with Dennis's sister, who lived in another state and called every 2 weeks and needed someone to remember her birthday and her kids' names. And I was that person, not because it was formally assigned to me, but because I was paying attention and Dennis was not. I had, in 8 months, threaded myself into the structure of that house the way load-bearing elements thread into a wall, invisibly, completely, and in a way that would only become apparent if they were removed. And through all of it, I had never once been addressed as someone who had a right to be there. There was also, in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet in the home office, the one Dennis used for business documents, a manila envelope. I had found it in February when I first organized that cabinet. I had seen the label on the tab. I had read it, and then I had set it back without saying anything, because at the time I was still learning the house, still learning the family, still giving things the benefit of patience. I left it where it was. But I remembered it was there. The dinner happened on a Saturday in late September. My mother had driven up again. Just her this time, no occasion, she wanted to see me. She brought a bag of fresh chiles from the market she drove 40 minutes to reach because they were the right kind. I was glad to see her. I set up the dining room. Dennis was home, Kristen was home, and I cooked again. Not the elaborate Saturday production, just a clean, honest meal. Chicken in a tomatillo sauce, rice, warm tortillas, the chiles my mother brought sliced thin and served on the side. We sat down at 6:30. Dennis poured wine. My mother was talking about her garden. She had put in a raised bed that summer and was unreasonably proud of it, which was completely deserved. The table was easy. I felt it going well. Kristen had been quieter than usual through the first part of the meal, which I had learned to read as a weather system, a quiet before a front moved through. I watched it without letting on that I was watching. It was my mother who brought it up, meaning no harm. She asked Dennis when they planned to repaint the front porch railing, which she had noticed was beginning to chip. She said it in the offhand way of a person who cares about a place. Not a criticism, just observation. Dennis said he hadn't gotten to it yet, that it was on the list. My mother glanced at me and I saw her clock his answer. I had told her, because I tell my mother things, that I had been helping with more than she might think. I said lightly that I could look into getting quotes this week. Kristen set her fork down. She looked across the table at me, and then she looked at Dennis, and she said, "Can I ask something? Does she get to just make decisions like that about the house now?" The word she landed in the center of the table like something dropped from a height. My mother went still. Dennis picked up his wine glass. I squared the napkin in my lap before I answered. I said calmly that getting a quote was not a decision, it was information. Kristen said, still looking at Dennis, not at me, "I just think it's a lot, her treating this like it's her house." "It's not her house. It's our house." Dennis said, "Kristen." She said, "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." He set down his glass and looked at me and said, in the tone of a man trying to keep a lid on something, "Marisol, maybe now isn't the time." I looked at my husband. I looked at my mother, who was looking at the tablecloth with a particular stillness that I recognized from every difficult moment of my childhood, the stillness of a woman absorbing something she will not show. I said, "Okay." Just that. I did not raise my voice. I did not look at Kristen. I picked up my fork and continued eating, and I kept my face entirely composed, and inside, something that had been patient for a very long time stopped being patient. After dinner, Dennis found me in the kitchen. He said Kristen didn't mean it the way it sounded. He said she was protective of the house, that it had been a hard few years for her. He said, "You know how she is." I said I did know how she was. He said, "I need you to be the bigger person here." He said it gently, the way you say something you believe is reasonable. I looked at him for a moment without speaking. The kitchen was quiet. I could hear the neighbor's dog somewhere in the distance, and the particular sound the refrigerator made when the motor cycled. I kept my hands still at my sides. Then I said I was going to finish cleaning up. He went back to the living room. I heard the television come on. I stood at the sink with the water running, and I thought about the $912 I had recovered in billing credits, and the equipment maintenance schedule that had prevented 2 service failures, and the insurance claim I had filed in 6 hours on a Tuesday in July while his daughter sat in her room, and the furnace invoice I had paid from my own account in March and waited 3 weeks to be reimbursed for, and I thought about my mother sitting at that table while a 26-year-old said she in that tone of voice, and I thought, enough. That night, after my mother left and Dennis was asleep, I went to the home office, opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, and took out the manila envelope. I set it on the desk. I did not open it yet. I had already opened it once, in February, the first week I organized that cabinet, and I knew what was in it. I sat with it for a moment in the dark of the office, with the ambient sound of the trucks in the side lot faintly audible through the window. Then I opened my laptop and I started making calls. Not that night, but planning them. 3 calls. 3 people. Each one a piece of something larger that Kristen had assumed, incorrectly, that she understood. By the time Dennis woke up the following morning, I had already sent the first email. The meeting happened on a Wednesday. I had chosen Wednesday because Dennis had a standing site visit in the morning and was rarely back before 2. I had chosen the dining room because it was the room where Kristen had said she in that tone of voice, and I wanted the geography to mean something, even if no one else in the room knew it meant something. I asked Kristen to come downstairs at 11. I told her I wanted to talk through something about the house. She came down in a sweatshirt, coffee in hand, with the particular unhurried quality of a person who has never been required to be anywhere on time in her own home. She sat across from me at the dining room table and looked at me with an expression that was not quite bored and not quite hostile, something in between, the expression she had been wearing at me, in various configurations, for 14 months. I had the manila envelope on the table in front of me. I had 2 other documents beside it, printed, paper-clipped, face down. I said I wanted to start by asking her a question. She said, okay. I asked her what she understood about the ownership structure of the house. She looked at the envelope. She looked back at me. She said, it's my dad's house. It was my grandfather's before that. I grew up here. I said I understood that. She said, so what's the question? I reached into the envelope and produced the first document. I placed it on the table between us, face up. It was the deed, the current recorded deed for the property, pulled from the county assessor's office website, printed clean. I had highlighted 2 lines. I said, your grandfather transferred the property into a family trust in 2019, 4 years before he died. Your father is the trustee. But the trust has 2 named beneficiaries. She leaned forward and looked at the highlighted lines. I watched her read them. I watched her read them a second time. The 2 named beneficiaries were Dennis Callahan and Marisol Navarro Callahan. I had found my name there the night I opened the envelope in February, the first week I organized that cabinet. Dennis had added me to the trust 2 weeks before the wedding, not as a gesture he had described to me in those terms, but as a legal fact recorded and filed. He had not mentioned it. He was not, I had come to understand, a man who narrated the things he did quietly. He simply did them. This one I had found on my own, and I had set it back in the drawer, and I had waited. Kristen said, that's not right. I said it was the recorded document. I gave her the assessor's office URL so she could verify it herself. She said, he wouldn't do that without telling me. I said I couldn't speak to what conversations she'd had with her father. She pushed the deed slightly back toward me, the way you push something away when you don't want to accept what it says. She said, that doesn't change anything. This is still our house. I grew up here. I turned over the first of the 2 paper-clipped documents. It was a 12-month summary, not a legal document, not filed anywhere, just a table I had built myself in a spreadsheet, clean and specific. Every household expense I had managed, paid, or directly recovered. The furnace repair, $1,100, March, paid from my personal account while Dennis was on a job site. The billing credit recovery, $412 returned to the utilities account, identified by me after 7 months of overcharges no one had noticed. The insurance claim filed in 6 hours on a Tuesday in July, 0 out-of-pocket, ceiling damage fully covered. The exterior painting contractor, managed through 3 weeks of prep and 1 weather delay, 2 years past its due date. The scheduling and vendor communication work I had done for Callahan Grounds from April through August, which Dennis had assessed as preventing $8,000 in emergency repair costs. Each line had a date, a dollar figure, and a 1-sentence description. The total at the bottom was $41,217 in direct financial contribution, expense management, and documented cost prevention across 14 months. I set it in front of her and I let her look at it. She said, this isn't, and then she stopped. I said, I want to tell you something, Kristen. You said at this table in front of my mother that this isn't my house. I want to walk through that with you. She said nothing. I said, in February you told my mother the food smelled different. You said it at the stove. You said it quietly, but she heard it and I heard it. She started to speak. I continued. I said, in April when I set up the household calendar you told your father I was trying to run things. You used that phrase, run things, and I know because he repeated it to me that same evening and asked me to be mindful of your comfort. I squared the second paperclip document, a printed email thread, 3 exchanges between Dennis and Kristen from April, which Dennis had left open on the shared household laptop and which I had read and photographed with my phone, not out of suspicion at the time but out of the specific alertness of a person who is starting to understand the room she is actually in. I placed it face up between us. I did not say anything. I let her read it. The color in her face changed. Not dramatically. A shift in the undertone, the way a room changes when a cloud moves across the sun. I said, you told him in that thread that I was treating the house like a project. That you didn't trust what I was doing with the filing cabinet. That you thought I was looking for something to use. I paused. I said, you were right about one part of that. She looked up at me. I said, I am very organized. I've been doing this kind of work for 9 years. I find things. I fix things. I file things. I recovered $412 in utility credits that this house had been losing for 7 months before I got here. I managed the insurance claim that saved this property from a 5-figure ceiling repair. I spent 3 evenings a week through April and May helping your father keep his business from falling behind after Roy retired, and by his own estimate that work saved the company $8,000 in emergency costs. I said, at this table at this dinner in front of my mother, who drove here and brought Childs from a market 40 minutes away, and sat quietly while you called her daughter like she was furniture. You asked your father if I get to make decisions about this house. I let that sit for a moment. The room was very quiet. I said, in February you told your father the calendar felt like I was running things. I was scheduling the cleaning service because someone had to. In March you heard the water come through the ceiling, and I found the shutoff and filed the claim while you stayed in your room. In April through August, I sat at this table 3 nights a week after my own full day of work, keeping your father's business from falling behind while he was stretched too thin to manage it alone. He called it keeping him straight. I called it Tuesday. I said, I am on the deed. I have been on the deed since before the wedding. And the work I have done inside this property, documented, dated, and specific, is in front of you right now. So I want to answer your question properly. Yes. I get to. I stood up. I gathered the deed and the documents, slid them back into the envelope, and tucked it under my arm. Kristen said I need to talk to my dad. I said that was a good idea. I said I would be in the office if she needed anything. I walked out of the dining room. I did not slam the door. I did not look back. Dennis came home at 1:47. I know the time because I was at my desk and I noted it when I heard his truck. Kristen had been in her room since 11:30. I knew because the house had been silent in the particular way it goes silent when someone is awake and not moving. I heard them talking in the kitchen. I could not make out the words, but I could make out the rhythm. Her voice first, fast and climbing, then his voice, lower, slower, with the long pauses of a man who is being told something he already knows and has been hoping not to discuss. 20 minutes later, Dennis knocked on the office door and came in. He sat down in the chair across from my desk. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had been carrying 2 separate understandings of his life and had just discovered they could no longer be kept in separate rooms. He said, "You should have told me you found it." I said, "You should have told me you put it there." He looked at the desk. He said, "I was going to. I didn't know how to bring it up without making it into something." I said, "It became something anyway." He asked me what I wanted. He asked it genuinely, the way a person asks when they have stopped performing and have arrived at the actual question. I said, "I want your daughter to understand that this is my home. Not a project. Not a temporary arrangement. Not something she gets to vote on with her friends at the table. My home. And I want you to be the one to tell her that, clearly, without softening it." He said, "That's going to be hard for her." I said, "I know. I have been making things easier for this household for 14 months. I would like that to be visible now." He nodded slowly. He said he would talk to her. He did. I do not know exactly what was said. I was not in the room. What I know is that Kristen came downstairs at 4 and stood in the kitchen doorway while I was making coffee, and she said in a voice that was smaller than her usual register, "I didn't know about the deed." I said, "I know you didn't." She said, "I didn't know about any of it. The stuff in the spreadsheet." I said, "Most people don't know about that kind of work until it stops getting done." She stood there for another moment. Then she said, "I don't know how to do this." I think she meant, the rearranging. The revision of a story she had been telling herself for 3 years about what her father's house was and who was allowed to be permanent inside it. I said, "That makes 2 of us. We could start by figuring it out." It was not resolution. It was not warmth. But it was an opening, and after 14 months of closed doors, I understood the value of an opening. I called my mother that evening. She answered on the second ring the way she always does. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, in Spanish, the way she says the things she means most, "Your aunt was right, you know, at the wedding. About patience." I said, "She wasn't talking about patience with them. My mother said no. She was talking about patience with yourself. Waiting until you were ready. Not until they were. I thought about that for a long time after I hung up. I did not go looking for a fight in that house. I went looking for a home, and I built one, quietly, in the margins of other people's assumptions about what I was and what I was owed. I tracked expenses in a spreadsheet not because I was building a case, or not only because of that, but because precision is how I love things. It is how I care for things. It is the form my attention takes. What I learned in 14 months is that invisible work is still work. The fact that no one sees it does not reduce what it costs. The fact that no one names it does not reduce what it produces. A pipe doesn't know who filed the insurance claim. A balance sheet doesn't know who caught the billing error. The house stands because of what was done inside it, not because of whose name anyone thought was on the deed. I also learned that the people who benefit most from your invisible work are often the ones most comfortable assuming it will continue without acknowledgement. That is not malice, in most cases. It is the specific blindness of people who have always had someone managing things in the background, and who have mistaken that management for the natural order of things rather than someone's daily choice. I made a different choice. I made it quietly, and I made it with documentation, and I made it at a dining room table in front of a manila envelope and 2 paper-clipped printouts. Some people will watch this and think I should have had the conversation earlier. Maybe. But I needed to know, first, that I was right about what I was seeing. I needed the receipts not just to show someone else, I needed them to show myself. To stand in that office on a Saturday night with the trucks in the lot and know, without any doubt, that I had not been imagining it. If any part of this story sat somewhere familiar for you, if you have ever folded a dish towel and said nothing when you had every right to say something, share this with someone who needs to hear it. The quiet ones are watching. The quiet ones are always counting. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. All characters, names, and events are entirely fictional and do not represent any real persons or situations.